I'll share the screen, Kamala. Hmm. Okay, I'm going to explain the Stoic idea of emotion as part of the Stoic idea of the art of living. Hmm. This was popular with most of the ancient schools, but especially with the Stoics. And the idea is you liken the art of living to other arts, like the art of surgery, so that surgery involves understanding the living body and improving your techniques and skills in order to deliver good outcomes for the patient. So that, and those two things, understanding and technique, are part of the art of living. So there are some implications for that. So that if we are all a work in progress, then that calls for certain virtues dealing with other people, but also in dealing with ourselves. So virtues like patience and compassion and objectivity and civility, all of those things are useful because of everybody being on a trajectory of change. This is also the flexible part of Stoicism, if you like. So this is exhibiting patience, for example, is a flexible Stoic thing to do. So the application of the Stoic doctrines is done patiently, etc. But that enables the doctrines themselves to be quite clear and direct. And because the Stoics are quite interested in reason, expressing oneself as clearly as possible is obviously a virtuous thing to do. So, emotions are a part of being human. So that would mean that we would expect the Stoics to develop an understanding of what the emotions are, and also to learn techniques and practice techniques to managing one's emotions. And the Stoics say that reason is the craftsman, so that's the craftsman in adapting oneself and improving the art of living. Okay. The emotions are divided into two kinds. One kind includes things like pity, anger, fear, grief, envy, jealousy, and spite. And the other kind includes things like joy, cheerfulness, cherishing, welcoming, good spirits. And the difference between these two things is that the sicknesses are disobedient to reason and the healthy emotions are well reasoned. This terminology, by the way, is from Chrysippus, who was the third head of the Stoic school. So, and Chrysippus was a person very interested in words. So these words are very carefully chosen. And in fact, the word healthy emotions is likely to have been actually invented by Chrysippus. So, incidentally, notice the active part of this. So the sicknesses are disobedient and the healthy emotions are well reasoned. So what the implication of that is that emotions are more like things that we do rather than things that happen to us. Now, why did Chrysippus use the word sicknesses, apart from it being very pointed? And there is a rationale behind this, so that if you're a Stoic, you think that a defining characteristic of being a human is that you have a capacity for reasoning. And that is a way in which humans are different from other things like rocks, trees, and other animals. So that being disobedient to reason is like a sickness because it's inconsistent with human nature, and it makes you more like a sheep or a wild beast. The sheep and wild beast idea comes from Epictetus. And there's one other advantage of sicknesses, that is, you're either sick or you're not sick. So you might think, I agree that envy is a really bad thing, but maybe a little bit of envy is necessary or useful. The purpose of calling these things sicknesses is to say that is not our doctrine. Our doctrine is either you're sick or you're not sick. And of course, because of that, it makes things clearer. So you don't have to fiddle around trying to work out how much sickness, is acceptable. Okay, now to actually see how the sicknesses are disobedient to reason, I've thought of a little scenario, and when I was writing one of the earlier versions of this, it was during the US presidential election. So you may have heard reported lots of on-street interactions between people of different persuasions, so that if you caught sight of someone with the wrong sign in their window or on their lawn, you might become angry. Or if you saw someone wearing the wrong sort of t-shirt or hat, you might become angry. What we're going to do is, just to make this concrete, this is just to make this concrete, is to, we are going to be the people who become angry, that is to say, you and I. We're going to try and put ourselves in the position of whatever, American you feel you can put yourself in the position of. So there are 3 steps in an angry scenario. These are being bitten, then becoming sick, and then becoming inflamed. These words are from Chrysippus again, and as usual, they're intended to stir you up a bit. Okay, let's look at the biting. If you're bitten by a bug, your reaction is going to be involuntary. It's going to make you jump back maybe, but it's going to be quite a personal one, quite idiosyncratic, so that you might not even notice, whereas some people will have quite a severe reaction. So in this case, in our on-street encounter, you see the other person with a t-shirt or hat on, and you might have an involuntary reaction. So you might break step or drop your mobile phone, say. So that's purely involuntary. Next thing, we may or may not become sick. We'll look at that next. And finally, if we do become sick, then that's the stage of inflammation. And inflammation is intended so that when you become really angry, you become careless of the consequences. So you might go and punch the other person, even though you're going to get hauled up to, the police station, for instance. Okay, so disobedience to reason. This is the Stoic position. To be angry, you need to agree to assent to these two propositions. An evil is at hand, and if this evil is at hand, it's appropriate, right and proper to be angry. So, some interesting things about this, that the cause of the emotion that we are going to have is internal. It's in these two decisions. The cause of the emotion is not the person walking down the street. The cause of the emotion is we deciding that there is an evil at hand, and that if it's at hand, it's appropriate to be angry. Both of those two steps are necessary. And remember, this is a very individual thing. So some people might not even notice the guy with the hat or t-shirt. So that's another reason why the cause is hard to pin on the outside, but the essential part is inside. Second interesting thing, if you are an adult human, there can be a biting, but there can't be a triggering, in the sense that this emotion is something that just happens to you without your involvement. So when people say that they are triggered, if they mean that it goes straight from seeing something to becoming angry or sad or whatever, without any involvement of their brains, that can be the case with children, but it can't be the case with adults. So now we need to talk about evil. In Stoicism, moral good and evil only apply to things that are up to us. So my character and my actions are up to me. The other persons who we encounter on the street are not up to me, though of course you might have preferences about their hat or their t-shirt. So at this point in our story, there's a biting, but there's not yet any assent. There's no agreement so far with an evil being present. So an evil isn't present to me, so I'm not angry as yet. And you guys are not angry yet, hopefully. Ooh. Okay. Next step, disobeying reason. And remember, we said that an evil can't have been present because it's not something that affected my actions or my character. So let's just decide that for the time being and then think about whether it's appropriate. And this is where we return to the art of living again. So being angry in reaction to this is going to produce self-harm in both our character and our actions. So that's because of the possibility of becoming abusive, and that actually happens in these circumstances. Epictetus would say like a wild animal. And also leads to deterioration of character because of the vice of self-righteousness. So that, as we said at the beginning, the art of living requires patience, civility, etc. Self-righteousness is quite inconsistent with being civil and courteous, etc. So, and then finally, once we have decided that it's appropriate to be angry, then we can have inflammation, disregard of consequences, verbal abuse, punch-ups, etc. So this is when we can say an evil is now present, but it is not in the place that we thought it was when we started out. It's present to ourselves. Okay, so that's really the account. We've seen that some emotions are disobedient to reason and contrary to nature, and they are sicknesses. Anger can be the cause of evil. And here's Seneca's view of a test incident of this kind. So I won't read it all, but he concludes, we've reached such a height of absurdity that we're vexed not by pain, but by the thought of pain. Like children who are frightened by a shadow, by a grotesque, or by a disfigured appearance, and so are brought to tears by names unpleasant, and gesticulations of the fingers, and by other things which in their ignorance they try to flee, driven by erroneous thinking. Now, well-reasoned emotions. Again, there's a two-step process very similar to the disobedient emotions, that a good is at hand, and then it's appropriate to feel joy or not, as the case may be. Two examples. Good spirits. Joy at inquiry into the universe. So inquiring into the universe is an activity praised by the Stoics, by Epictetus, for example, as an activity that needs no justification. And Cicero remarks that wisdom is the knowledge of things human and divine, and their causes. Matters divine include what we would call the natural sciences. So if this good, if making an inquiry by ourselves into the nature of the universe is at hand, then it's appropriate to be joyfully uplifted. Seneca is very keen on this, as you can see, that without this, life wouldn't have been worth living, essentially, is the Seneca view. Second example, cheerfulness, joy in the sensible person's deeds. Agrippinus is featured several times in Epictetus. So in this case, Agrippinus is being sent into exile by Nero, and he responds saying, very well, we'll eat our meal in Erisha, which is a country town outside of Rome. So the important thing here is that Agrippinus does not become angry or sad, but continues to be practical. So when we take on board Agrippinus's nature, that produces an uplifting of the mind because it's good. A good response that Agrippinus has made, and consequently we can be joyful about that. So that's the Stoic understanding of the emotions. Next, we can just consider one or two strategies for emotion management. There are many, a lot of strategies put forward by the Stoics, but this is one example. And maybe it's a good one because it's a more difficult example. So what we find with Chrysippus is he uses words in such a way as to be provocative if he can, and so does Epictetus. And so this is Epictetus's inoculation against grief that he recommends, since we're sticking to the sickness idea. So, with everything that's a source of delight to you or is useful to you, of which you are fond, remember to keep telling yourself what kind of thing it is, starting with the most insignificant. If you're fond of a jug, say, this is a jug that I'm fond of, and then if it gets broken, you won't be upset. If you kiss your child or your wife, say to yourself that it is a human being that you're kissing, and then if one of them should die, you won't be upset. So this is a reminder of the terms and conditions from Epictetus of life on earth. But no, you won't be upset thing. If you do practice what Epictetus recommends with the jug and so forth, and you might have other mantras like this one, I knew that I'd fathered a mortal. This is a famous example about Anaxagoras, actually. But if you keep these kinds of things at hand, both night and by day, as Epictetus says, then the biting is not going to be escaped, but it might be deferred for a bit. Okay, then thinking about the grieving, if we are Stoic, we would say that an evil is not at hand because it belongs among those things that lie outside the sphere of choice, that are not my own. So what does it matter to me, says Epictetus. Okay, remember we've already had the biting where you chewed up quite a bit about the event. But what we're talking about is what happens after the biting and recovering from this. So what's when you are actually doing the practice recommended by Epictetus, then there's an effect on the person here and now. And this is the effect, I think, that you find. It leads to recognizing the terms and conditions, namely in this example that people die. That, I suggest, leads to cherishing, so that if you are dandling your child or talking to your toddler or your spouse, you are reminding yourself that a good is at hand and that it's appropriate, right and proper to cherish that moment and that person. And this is what Seneca says about this kind of thing. For when I had friends, I had them as one who would lose them. Now that I have lost them, I am as one who still has them. So the cherishing has taken place while the people were still there, and therefore they haven't been lost. Okay, well, we could now spend a lot of time on the other Stoic antidotes, inoculations and remedies, but maybe that will be sufficient for the time being. Thank you. Ooh.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks very much, Terry, for that. Lots of interesting stuff. So, as I said, I'll keep the recording going. When anyone had any questions or requests for clarifications for Terry? By the way, I love the use of the, what's it called? The medical terminology, sicknesses, inoculation. And it just brought to mind the fact that I think it was Epicurus who made this parallel between philosophy and medicine. I think it was him. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he said, and Seneca talks about it. Anyway, he said that philosophy is to the mind what medicine is to the body. So, yeah, interesting. I'm going to keep blabbering if nobody has got anything to say. Has anyone got anything to say?
Well,
Fadi, yeah, go ahead.
I've been trying to formulate how to say it. I think what I get from it is that one shouldn't be attached, basically. It's like the Buddhist non-attachment approach to life. But what I mean, get the impression is that, you know, the emotions are not, cannot be overruled by reason so easily. You know, emotions don't work through reason, because you get attached, one gets attached to people they love. Now, could be reasonable or not reasonable. It's another story, but it doesn't mean that if it is unreasonable, it can be just cut off. Emotions can still persist despite being unreasonable. It's very difficult to be just purely rational. You know,
Yeah, I don't think. Sorry.
Yeah, a human being, you know, have the emotions have their own, you know, reason, way of reasoning.
Okay, I don't think you're required to be detached, but it's the emotional reaction to events that is intended to be managed, so that and it's also an art. So as you say, sometimes it feels like the emotions are involuntary, and perhaps that's often the case, but it's a matter of learning. It's understanding that there is these two propositions that you are agreeing to each time, and noticing that you actually do that. And yes, so one of the techniques is, you know, supposing someone's making you angry, is to step back and pause. And then if you do that, you can see here's an opportunity to decide not to be angry, or to decide that this person is saying something about themselves rather than about you, for example. So yeah, so it's an art of, and of course you can see examples where you know, people relate to their children, and you have the idea that your child can't conceivably do anything wrong, for example, and then become very upset whenever they get into trouble and try to find anything to blame but the child themselves. So if you are able to step back a bit from the unconditional commitment to the idea that everything they do is right, then that's going to be helpful for them. Whereas parents who are going to indulge their children constantly is not going to be good for them. But so you have to be able to separate the, you have to be able to stand back. You have to be able to stand back if you're a surgeon. So the last thing you want when you go into the accident ward is that this surgeon becomes emotionally involved with your injuries and, you know, wants to cry or hug, or, you know, when really what you want is the surgeon to fix whatever broken leg or whatever you have, skillfully and dispassionately.
I have a question about that.
Thanks. All right. Sorry, can I stop you there, James? So it was Paul first. Just raise your hand and then I'll be able to, and there, James.
I think mine is separate. If James's question follows from what Terry's saying, he wants to ask something about what Terry's just said, I'm happy for James to go first.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was just wondering about when this practice becomes counterproductive, and in relation to your example of the surgeon, of course, yeah, you wouldn't want them to become too emotional, because that might become counterproductive to their success as a surgeon. But at the same time, you wouldn't want them to care so little about you, that they wouldn't, that surely their success would demand a certain amount of caring, a certain amount of responsibility and intention, and wish for you to be a well person. So I was just interested in when this starts to become harmful, and also your example of the parent. Surely it would become counterproductive for them to not care enough. I'm not saying that, to not react enough, if that makes sense. My question makes sense.
Okay. Well, with the surgeon, what you'd be looking for, I'd say, is rational compassion. So you don't want the surgeon to be exhibiting pity, for example, for the person. You want them to have compassion and realize that they're a person and that you're actually fixing them. But it is, of course, it is an operation of highly skilled machine-like behavior, really, when you're doing the actual operation. So I think, Epictetus makes some things about this kind of thing, where one of the examples is your friend loses his body and they're distraught. Then what should you do? Should you become distraught as well, or should you sympathize and try to talk the person down? But if you're going to become distraught, of course, this can be an accelerant counter. I don't know if you've ever seen this. You've seen this where some person's really upset, then their friend gets really upset, and so then they're twice as upset by the time, they're finished. Whereas what you really want to do is to help the person. You help the person by not having the same, fear or distress or whatever that they have, but by talking them down, I suppose.
Can I just interject 1 second? I'm thinking, I'm wondering whether there's, it's a question of middle ground, like Aristotle would advocate. So, for example, just to something personal that happened to me when I went to see the GP once. I think it was GP, and they take your history from your relatives, your parents and stuff. At one point, I said that my mom had cancer. And he kept scribbling on, and he just said, sorry to hear about that. And he just totally came across as somebody who is going through the emotions, no compassion whatsoever. So I didn't want him to, to go to all distressed on me or anything, but a little bit of genuine compassion could have gone a long way. So I wonder whether there's a middle ground there. Thank you very much. Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Really interesting topic. Thanks for the talk. Just to follow that point before I ask make my observation is, I think Epictetus does say somewhere that we shouldn't be cold like a statue. That when somebody is grieving, we can go a certain amount, but not to feel emotions all the way to our center. He uses some kind of terminology like that, so that we do show, sort of an understanding and a sympathy or empathy. But I suppose I wanted to maybe address the point that Fadi was making. I think my understanding is that the Stoics see the emotions as something very natural, and that they provide very useful information to us. And there's no sense of wanting to suppress the emotions or to think that in themselves there's something wrong with them. But I agree that there seems to be the understanding that when they become too strong, and they often use that terminology of strong emotions when it's problematic, so that we perhaps would at that point lose any reason that we even got. My understanding is that emotions, as I say, are natural and good, and they give us information perhaps when we're making good assessments of a situation, and that's when they're the positive emotions. And when we're making errors of judgment, that's when we experience strong negative emotions. So it's a sort of alarm bell, and if it's ringing too loudly, then we're making more and more of an error of judgment. And I think I've read in Chrysippus that he thought that a strong negative emotion was actually equivalent to an error of judgment. They weren't separate things, they were the same thing.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes.
I just read, so just one second, I just read the comment by Yeshi. It says, I agree with Fadi as I struggle with negative emotion. Yeshi, I don't know if you can hear me. Feel free to open your mic, unmute yourself. But if you want to say anything more, otherwise we'll just leave it at that. Okay. So who's next? Because I heard somebody saying something and I just, who was it? Was it Christopher or somebody else? Was it Leo? Okay, yeah, Leo and then Christopher. Sorry, Christopher.
Great. Thanks, Terry. That was really interesting. Yeah, it was just a question, really. I think some of your notes seem to imply some form of anger is okay because it's an emotion and it's natural. And that distinction, I think, between injury and insult is quite clear. But what I wondered was, you know, how much anger is permissible under a Stoic framework? You know, how far can you go? Because it wasn't really clear what you could get away with and sort of be justified, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I would say none.
None, okay.
Permissible. Of course.
Sorry, that's the Stoic take on things, isn't it? That no amount of anger is.
Yes.
I happen to defer, but yeah, that's the Stoic idea.
Yeah, and it's the sickness idea. So you're either sick or you're not sick.
Well, that's it. Can I just say something? Because I was going to ask you, so maybe this is the right moment. Yeah, the binary thing. So there's no non-binary thing, is there? Allowed. I don't know. To me, it's too much black and white, either sickness or non-sickness, either wisdom or non-wisdom. Do you think that there's a gradient there and that we should appreciate the fact that somebody is, I mean, the whole idea of proptones, is that you're on that path to personal development and betterment, et cetera, et cetera. So to dismiss the fact that somebody is a little bit wise and not, a fully fledged wise man or wise woman, it doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, well, that's the principle of the art of living, isn't it? That you are making progress towards the binary situation. So, yes, but so the objective is that there would never be anger in any circumstance. But suppose you do become angry for some reason, then the next thing to do is suppression. So people have probably done this. So you grit your teeth so that you can't speak, and then you turn away. And then you're suppressing the volcano until the next day, and the next day you find that it's completely gone away, or it's nowhere near as maddening as you thought it was the first time. So when one's making progress, sometimes you might actually have to do a suppression. It's not good for you, of course. It's better to manage things so you don't actually become angry.
I think the motivation was because there's a quote from Aristotle who said, anybody can become angry, that is easy, but to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, that is not within everybody's power and is not easy. So I took that to mean anger could have a purpose if used correctly. And I'm not convinced about the binary that you've stated. I say that as a Stoic as well. I'm not sure I would interpret it as such, because if the anger serves a purpose, in other words, to educate somebody or to bring about a change that wouldn't have existed without the anger, then I don't think I could say you should just suppress it. So what do you think about all that?
Well, Stoics would say that Aristotle's position is too difficult to do. It's too difficult to have a cutoff with anger or, those kinds of emotions. And the best thing is to aim never to become angry in the first place. But as for the usefulness of anger, the Stoics would say, no, there is no use. And that it would be, and the kind of examples that you get is hunting. Is the hunter angry when he's shooting the rabbit? Or is he just, being accurate? So you don't have to be angry at a rabbit to go rabbit hunting. And if you're in a war situation and you become angry, then that's going to make you reckless. So what you're going to do is do whatever you do. I don't think the military honors are given out to people who become angry. They've been given out to people who were courageous and maybe self-sacrificing as well, but not angry.
I think that's the degree to which the anger is retained. So anger may have been the motivation to respond, and then you respond with self-control. I think what you're referring to is if you remain angry and that eats you up inside, and then you perform less efficiently than you might without the anger. But the anger has created something, as long as it doesn't control you. So I'm in agreement, you shouldn't retain anger, but I think it can serve some purpose. But it's quite tough, as you've indicated.
Yeah, Stoics would say it's too risky.
Thanks, Mark. I just wanted Christopher to, and then Paul.
Thank you. Terry, thank you very much. And that was beautifully referenced. You said in one of your slides that something like disobeying reason, maybe I decide an evil is present. Right. Can I turn that up? Can I turn that upside down and say I cannot decide that an evil is present unless I disobey my reason?
Yes.
Can I say if it's at all possible for you to make a reference to maybe something that you happened to you, so that everything becomes clearer? I'm just struggling to understand. I'm just struggling to understand what you're saying. That's all. Can we make a practical example?
Is that me or Terry?
No, I'm talking to you, Chris.
Oh, well, if I was sort of passing Breonna Taylor's apartment and I saw the police fire 30 bullets in there, can I not decide that an evil is present without losing my reason?
Right. So you are absolutely right to notice that. And as a general rule, in any of this kind of scenarios that we were talking about, or the one that you gave an example of, if you were Stoic, you would say an evil is not present to me. And that is because for an evil to be present to me, it has to be something to do with my actions or my character. So suppose there's a pandemic, for instance. No Stoic would be able to say that that is an evil. That is not an evil because there's no moral content to it. Also, it's something that's not up to me. So, when you see a crime being committed, that's exactly right. You're going to say there is no evil present. But of course, that doesn't mean that you are indifferent to the crime taking place. It's
So you wouldn't be indifferent to social injustice. So I'm just trying to understand.
no,
I'm not sure, Christopher, what he meant by the previous example, but you wouldn't be insensitive to an injustice, you wouldn't be insensitive to dictatorship, you wouldn't be insensitive to police brutality, etc., right?
Yeah, but
that's correct. And the difficulty is deciding to what extent I do have control and to what extent I can do something to, counter this evil.
right. So you could wrestle one of the cops to the ground, I suppose, in your scenario. I'm not sure who this Bryony person is, or so whether it's a good idea to be shooting through the door or not.
Or you could join a pressure group and try to change things.
Exactly, yeah.
Up.
Yeah. So, yes, I mean, one of the things about this is if you have the emotional involvement, it runs out. Or you find these things so upsetting that you can't actually bear to join a pressure group because you get the circulars from them every week and they, have all of these unfortunate stories in them, and that makes you upset. So that means the emotion means that you're actually made ineffectual. Just as if you're a surgeon and you're feeling emotion, it will make you ineffectual.
I don't know that there needs to be any emotion. I think I'm capable of deciding that this is evil, and to the extent that I have any power, I should act.
Okay, maybe there's something about the word evil, because the good and evil term is reserved for morals, and specifically for my own morals. And so if the cops are doing something naughty, then it's the cops' individual morals that are concerned. But the spectators' situation is different. So one can deplore the degeneracy of the cops who are shooting the bullets through the door. And the true evil is present to that policeman or policewoman, but it's not present to you. What's present to you is something that's you prefer not to happen, and you want to do something about it. So that's different. So yes, a bad thing.
Okay, I will shut up now, Terry. But I think we're getting well into sin not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee.
Whatever that means. Should we move on? I know, sorry, Chris, I didn't mean to be disrespectful, but I think Paul had something to say, so
Yeah, I have something to say which is to do with a personal experience. So I think that's what you're looking for, Carmelo. But I also just to contribute a bit to that conversation. In Stoics, which is supposed to be a good report of a Chrysopian handbook on ethics, they do have some explanation of their technical terminology, which Terry quite rightly also pointed out that a lot of these terms were technical, and when we just use the translated term in English, it throws up all sorts of associations we have with those words. So they do make a distinction between anger as a strong emotion to be avoided and what they call righteous indignation, which you may feel for a very dispreferred indifferent. So if people are attacking somebody and you think that's a very strong dispreferred indifferent, it's correct to feel righteous indignation and try and act on that. And that doesn't in any way involve any anger. So they did carve out ways to respond to those kinds of situations. I just also wanted to say, I'm not sure that suppress, Terry, is the right word. So if you're feeling anger, I think putting a lid on it, we know, is very dangerous. That wasn't actually the Stoic recommendation. The Stoic recommendation is to inwardly analyze where you've made an error of judgment and change that judgment. So that they wouldn't recommend suppressing a strong emotion, I don't think.
It's true, because I'm sorry to interrupt. You always stem, so that's the CBT model, isn't it? Of what was it called? Cognitive emotion model.
Yeah.
So basically, whenever we act in a certain way,
it's cognitive behavior therapy.
Yeah.
Cognitive. Yeah, I'm trained in that.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
So yeah, maybe
brilliant. Love CBT, Tanya. So it always stems from an erroneous judgment, and what they do is they advocate this reframing of the situation, so changing that distorted belief into something that's more rational, something more beneficial, something more realistic.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Tanya about that, actually. That'd be great to hear some more about that. But can I just give the anecdote, which is the personal experience, which is to do with a medical condition I have, where I have very high cortisol levels, and it leads to a sort of very strong kind of fight or flight response in me. So quite often things happen and I do immediately feel quite strong emotion, or I want to kind of escape from a situation, and that's just to do with a chemical imbalance. So that's something which you know, have to deal with on top of whether one is making errors of judgments and things like that. So I'd just like to share that. I don't know if there's something you want to say about that. Sorry,
it's not always, you know, just to kind of reinforce what you were saying. It's a model that doesn't necessarily, I guess, always starts from the cognitions and then goes into emotions and behavior. But sometimes it's a multi-directional. So it stands, for example, in your case, it would be a physiological reaction, and then may cause a certain mood to surface and a certain emotion to surface.
Yeah, I find the Stoic method very helpful despite that, and I think it's the same as the CBT methods. Thanks.
So, Tanya, did you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, well, it actually leads to my question, actually, because I'm very new to Stoicism, so my knowledge is, well, it's very limited. So I'm here more to listen and learn. But just from what I've been reading, it does feel like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, in my opinion, seems to be quite influenced by Stoicism, you know, because we would often look at our interpretations of things. So if a situation happens, we would look at if any cognitive distortions would happen, like black and white thinking, personalization, catastrophizing, and then from that we would look at what we kind of call something called negative automatic thoughts. So Terry, would you say that is similar to the biting part, where there's that initial visceral reaction, and from that we would interpret that as our negative automatic thoughts, which frame something in quite a negative way, and then through our interpretation of it, it influences how we feel and our behaviors. So sometimes it can be quite useful to kind of look at some of the thinking patterns that are going on in order to reframe things.
Yeah, the key thing about the biting is it's involuntary. Carmelo, what do you think? Do you think that's?
And you're talking about this the idea of the proto emotions, right?
Yeah.
That sometimes the Stoics say that you can have an emotion that's very much out of your control because it's something that's almost embedded in your physiology, like a fight or flight response. When you go, all of a sudden you go pale because something startled you, or you go a bit teary-eyed, or something like that. So that's a proto emotion, something that But then if you continue and kind of back up that emotion with your belief system, I guess that's when you're in the realm of an emotion that's dictated by your thoughts rather than an immediate reaction, which for the Stoics is completely understandable and acceptable.
Yeah, and I find that a lot of what we would, obviously depending on what approach you're using as a therapist, it's not about necessarily getting rid of those emotions or suppressing them or raising them, but it's acknowledging that they're there, but learning how to manage them.
Exactly. And can I just say, because that's something I wanted to, I love the fact that Terry, when you basically divided the understanding of emotions and then the managing of emotions, and rightly emphasizing the understanding, but there can't be any processing of the emotions if you don't understand what's going on. So you've got to have a certain level of self-awareness. For me to say that I, this morning, was guilty of displaced anger is because I realized that I was being a dick and accusing my friend of, whatever, just because I was unhappy with the situation. And so, you got to have that that understanding. Otherwise, you can't. So self-awareness, yeah. In fact, I took part in the I don't know if there's this Stoic practice group that's going on every month, and the Eve, who's running the group, she was talking about temperance, which is the topic that we're going to tackle next month. And she associated the idea of temperance with self-awareness, which we don't normally do. Whenever we talk about the four cardinal virtues, we never talk about self-awareness, but that is the, first stepping stone. You can't go anywhere without self-awareness. So, yeah.
Just on CBT, Donald Robertson's written quite a good book on the Stoic roots of CBT.
Yeah, Tanya, did you know about this? He wrote a whole book about the parallels between CBT and Stoicism. And how,
okay.
Absolutely, yeah, you should read it. And it's how Stoicism is the forerunners of CBT, if you like.
Yeah, it felt like it when I've been reading books. I felt like this is very similar. Well,
Yeah.
CBT is very similar to Stoicism.
Let me see if I can look it up.
There we go.
Any?
Oh, okay. I've read one of his books, but not that one. Oh, great. Thank you. I'll take a note of that.
Could you write, should we write the title, Terry, in the chat box? If you tell me the title, I'm going to write it down.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. You mean this one, Carmelo?
Yeah, this one, the philosophy of CBT, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's quite a good book, I think. Some of them are, he works quite well. And he's a practitioner, of course, isn't he?
Yeah. So, any other comments, questions? Paddy?
So, I think we talked a lot about how emotions can be triggered by our interpretation of events, which I think is very, very important. And this is what's in our control, isn't it? It's the part that we can at least manage and understand ourselves and use reason, perhaps, with that.
Yeah. Can I just remind, Fadi, can I just quickly remind the famous mantra by Epictetus, when he says people are not upset by things, but by the judgment they have about things.
So then this leaves a bit the question that if we are not triggered, then what happens with the emotions? Are they completely gone, or they can still happen for other reasons?
No, they're not there at all.
We're not judging. Sorry?
The idea is that you need to agree to both of those things, that an evil is present and this reaction is appropriate before you can have the emotion. That's the idea. In the case of anger, that is, of course. For other emotions, they would be different. Well, for the ones contrary to reason, they would all be an evil is present. And then the reactions would be different. So if in the case of envy, the evil that supposedly you think is present is that, what is it? That it's not right that someone has a big car or something, you know. It's easier to see maybe how these things work than is something, you know, like anger, which has got a lot of, it's much easier to agree that envy is not a good idea in nearly all circumstances than anger, perhaps.
You know, there is the difference between basic emotions and secondary emotions. I think what you're talking about is more of on the secondary part where judgment, social judgments and preferences get in. But there are basic emotions, let's say, which have survival value, that if, let's say, something is dangerous coming and I'm scared, it's not a good idea to just sit and think, am I going to get killed here? You know,
The
emotions are
proto-emotions, the ones we were referring earlier.
Yeah, in psychology, they call them basic emotions, you
Right.
know, anger, fear, you know, joy, and these are 5 basic ones that have survival value. They protect the organism. And sometimes it's good to, you know, instinctively, the instinct gets over basically, and we act.
Well, the snakes are a good example, I guess. But when you automatically jump back from the snake, there probably actually isn't any fear present yet. This is completely automatic. But then when you look again and you see that it's slithering along, then that's when the fear comes. And then the question is whether that helps you or not. So if it makes you stand perfectly still, I mean, it would depend on the circumstance, would it? Sometimes it would be best to run away. Sometimes it would be best to stand still. And if the fear is present, it might cloud that judgment, possibly.
I think you can have that automatic reaction. I can't remember who, but then you work with it. So I can't remember who makes the example of, so you're alone in your place and you hear a noise. You immediately jump because you get scared. You think it may be an intruder or something. So that's your initial reaction. But then after a while, you think, no, it could be, you know, the wind, or it could be something else. So you process that initial reaction with the power of reason. I think James wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it seems like the conversation's kind of relating to the different levels of reactions, like the different amounts of pain involved. Because the biting stage, it just reminded me of this example where I was walking, I was doing one of my neighborly walks, daily walks, quite happy and feeling quite calm and relaxed. And then I felt something fall on me from a tree and bite me on the back of the neck. And it was extremely sudden, quite alarming, because it felt like something had dropped. So I imagined a spider or something. I mean, it was at the time of the year when all the insects were kind of dozy and coming out of their hibernation, you know, quite confused or whatever. And that happened, and I felt pain, like actual physical pain. And then I guess what happened next relates to what you're saying, is that I then began to interpret what had happened and think about it, not knowing what it actually was, and that triggered a whole cascade of behavior, if you like, where I was trying to look at it in the mirror. I was like, what was it? I looked up insect bites. I called somebody, because it was such an alarming thing that happened, and it wasn't normal. So I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the kind of Stoic thoughts on the different levels of biting, and you know, because surely if it's an extreme incident, that's obviously much harder to then pull back and think reasonably about, because like Fadi was saying, your survival instinct is going to become involved. and you haven't got time. And I imagine the example, I can't remember who gave it, Christopher was talking about some sort of injustice that you might be witnessing. That could easily trigger a same kind of survival instinct, because it might be so unjust that you can't help but feel protection, some sort of protection behavior, some protection instinct, survival instinct for somebody else as well. So yeah, not sure if that's a lot of ideas in there, but what would be your thoughts on that?
I'm sure there are bitings that are very, very chewy, and bitings that are, you know, stub my toe kind of biting. So, and if something like somebody dies, for example, that's a very big biting, and because it's going to cause a whole rejigging of lots of mental process, and so that might, you know, it's not going to just last 10 minutes or something, but, you know, days perhaps, or longer possibly. So yeah, degrees of biting. But the emotion comes in by making a judgment about the situation subsequent to the biting.
So it's important, I guess, to remember that this is about emotion and not necessarily action.
Right, so you can act without being angry or grief-stricken or whatever, envious, whatever the emotion is. Paul?
There's a relevant bit for James, I think, in Epictetus, where he talks about if you're prone to certain strong emotions. So some people might be prone to fear, and other people might be prone, for example, for anger. And he recommends that you set yourself a sort of goal where maybe you've not been angry for a week, and then you make progress and you've not been angry, you know, for a day. And so that might help sort of give a sense of this gradation that you're looking for, James, where perhaps a length of time is a good measure. You know, I've not felt this strong emotion for a certain length of time, and you try and train yourself to feel it less and less often. And I think that, again, I've said this to link it with what Fadi was saying. It's not, I don't think the goal is to never feel anything. I think that they value emotions as providing us with lots of information. It's only when they become so strong that they begin to interrupt our reasoning processes. Can I just make a...
Sorry, and I just wanted to reiterate what you were saying. They, for example, the Stoics tend to juxtapose the emotion of fear with caution, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you want to be cautious about something, but not going to the extreme of losing control and, you know.
Yeah.
So after you got bitten by an insect, maybe, you know, you think, oh, well, what can I do about this? Should I contact 111, or should I see my GP about it, so to put my mind at ease? So you were saying, Paul?
So caution was part of their virtues. So one of the elements within prudence is caution. So that was a virtuous aspect which you could see blending into fear, as you say, once it becomes an illness. But I just wanted to make the point, we're talking about negative emotions, but they also, I think you'll say this, agree with this, Terry, but let me know, is that strong feelings, which are perhaps we see in the Western set as positive, are also problematic. So if we feel overexcited, you know, very strong pleasurable emotions, they're just as problematic in the Stoic system as the things that we're talking about today so far.
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think you're prevented from having strong feelings, with feelings not being exactly the same kind of things as emotions. So to feel deeply that something rather is important, for example, doesn't necessarily imply that you're angry or sad about that thing. It maybe just implies that you want to do something about it, perhaps.
I just want to say something about you, Paul. At one point you said, I think Epictetus says in the discourses that, well, it's not like you can't feel any emotions. We're not statues, right? Is that him? It just reminded me of an anecdote. I don't know who, I can't remember who says it. But basically, there's this Stoic who sees this cynic embracing a statue in winter. And I think he asked him, well, were you doing that? No, is it difficult? Because it's, it was really freezing cold and it's embracing this statue of marble or something. So it would have been really, really cool to do that. And the guy says, no, it's not difficult at all. And he says, so where's the challenge? Is that relevant? I don't know. No, not even a little bit. Well, I guess
it could be relevant in that that's about managing and bearing with discomfort. I mean, when I work with people who are anxious, it's not necessarily about alleviating the fear, but it's about becoming more brave. So it's about being able to tolerate something rather than not feeling that at all. That's how I work with people if they're distressed.
It's not like, you got no rewards for no feeling, no emotions at all, but rather you feel them and there's a struggle there and you try to work with them and overcome them. That's the way the Stoics would look at emotion.
So I see that as
relevant. It's very much, and it's very much the stereotype goes that these unemotional Stoics, stiff upper lip, suppress everything. No, we know that's not the truth.
Yeah, just what Paul was saying, you can be delirious with joy, for example, and that would be excessive. And the idea of the good emotions is that they're well reasoned. And so being delirious with something wouldn't suggest that that is well reasoned.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, I mean, that's quite an interesting debate. So it's a very good presentation, Terry. Maybe we can call it today.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions, everyone, because now I shall have to go and think about them.
Okay. Well, I hope you all enjoyed it. We're going to be back for a new meeting in January sometime. And may have a nice festive break as possible, as peaceful as it can be. And we'll see you around January.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks, Carmelo.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.